He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director, and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 27 years of experience, actually more than 27 years of experience. Together, Henry and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about the creative brief, briefing and advertising. We are back, Henry. Today, we are going to continue a kind of a new thing we're doing, which is we're going to break down a piece of creative and do a reverse engineering exercise to see if we can figure out the brief. And today we're picking out a classic. I think we recently did a kind of a classic reverse engineering with some spots from Apple. Today we're going to do a Super Bowl spot for Snickers in 2010 with Betty White, which I think changed the game, no pun intended, for Snickers. So this was the beginning of, I think, a pretty powerful campaign, but this was the kickoff. Sorry with the sports analogies here.
The puns.
The puns, can't help it. So let's take a look at this classic.
Mike, what is your deal, man?
Come on, man. You've been riding me all day.
Mike, you're playing like Betty White out there.
That's not what your girlfriend said.
Baby.
Whoa.
Eat Snickers. Better?
Better. Hey! I'm all back! That hurt.
You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers satisfied.
All right, Henry, as the strategist, I've got some thoughts on this. What we are going to try to do here is figure out the brief. So we're not going to do like the entire brief, but some of the key questions that we would normally explore when we're writing a brief as an exercise, which we encourage all brief writers to do as a thought exercise. Where would you start on this one? Would you want to start with the problem, with the insight, single-minded proposition? What are some of your thoughts?
So the current brief template or format that I use has the first question is the context, like what's going on that we need to do anything. And I think that, again, when we're doing this exercise, we don't have any particular knowledge into the situation, but as a strategist, I could very easily see the strategist or the planner receiving a bunch of information about Snickers, the category, et cetera, et cetera. And really the context here probably was one of decline of the brand and decline of the category. We've seen this in other categories, kind of related categories like carbonated soft drinks, that carbonated soft drinks took off in the 20th century. They were huge. And then in like the late 80s and in the 90s, we started to see a decline in consumption in carbonated soft drinks for a lot of reasons, health related reasons, et cetera, but also changing preferences and tastes as things like Snapple started coming online and so forth. And I think probably that's what we were seeing here. If I had to guess, there was some data somewhere that was saying, look, we're lagging our competitors in a declining category. And that category is candy bars. And I think that kind of sets up maybe the brief that led to this spot.
I think that's a great observation. So the problem, we could say, would be how to address the decline or the fall off of market share for Snickers. So what do you think? I mean, the objective seems pretty clear then. If we know what the problem is, the objective would be to boost sales. But that kind of seems to me as a default objective. Of course, we want to boost sales. Could we be more refined than that?
Yeah. So, and then this is the question that neither of us know, was whose idea it was, whether it was the strategist's idea, and I could believe that it might be a strategist, or maybe the creatives, or together collaborating, was the idea of repositioning Snickers outside of the candy bar category. Like, how do we break the scheme that we're currently trapped in a declining category? Well, let's pretend we're in another category, and that category is a snack food, right? And where that comes from, I could only speculate, but it might have come from a list of benefits and features, right? Like if we're talking about Snickers compared to some of its competitors, it's got peanuts in it. It's a good healthy size to it. It feels like it has more because of the peanuts, it feels like it has more substance to it than just chocolate or sugar, right? So I think that perhaps in that, articulation of, well, we have a bigger serving size, where we have peanuts, is very hearty, it's a very filling candy bar, that maybe someone got the bright idea and the light bulb turned on and said, you know what if we treat this almost like a nutrition bar or some sort of fulfilling snack that cures hunger rather than being a sweet treat.
Almost like an energy snack
Exact.
or something.
Yeah, exactly. And
Okay.
they don't make that implicit. They don't make that explicit promise. They kind of make it implicitly, though, in that
Right.
when they're showing the activity of playing sports, he's not performing his best. He eats the Snickers and then he's back to normal. So there's an implicit promise there that this is food. This will give you the benefits of food. It's not, the occasion here isn't that he's craving a sweet treat or he's craving chocolate or he's craving caramel. It's really, and we see it with kind of the end line there of, you're not yourself when you're hungry, right? So
Right.
it's kind of to restore balance in this person's like nutrition, I guess, if you want to call it that. But again, it is advertising, right? So we're stretching a little bit reality here, but I think you can make the argument that of all the competitors, Snickers, because of the nature of the candy bar, was in a good place to make this claim where maybe some of the others couldn't.
Well, I think Paul Feld would probably nod his head and say, this is great entertainment, and that's really what it accomplished. Now I can recall two of these spots from the campaign, and maybe you have others. The one that I remember, of course, is this one. This is the most famous one, Betty White. The other one I remember is with Elton John. So thinking back on those two, I'm trying to, to answer the next question on a brief is, who are we talking to? Now, the answer seems pretty clear based on the Betty White version of this. Not quite as clear if you look at the Elton John, although the players or the participants in each of those spots were young, and they tended to be young men, although not exclusively young men. There were a couple of women in both of those spots. So how would you go about answering the question, who are we talking to?
Well, I think you're right. And I don't remember off the top of my head with the situation in the Elton John one, but in this one with Betty White, certainly, we see this young men playing tackle football. It looks like it's a fall day. The field's kind of muddy and it doesn't seem very warm. It's football weather, basically. And if casting were to give us a hint, and I think it's dangerous to sometimes do that, because you can cast people that have nothing to do with the target audience. I'm thinking about Where's the Beef, right? We had 3 biddy old ladies in that commercial,
Right.
but they weren't targeting biddy old ladies. They were targeting the rest of us. They were just
Right.
using them for comic effect. Just like here, we're using Betty White for comic effect, and Abe Vigoda, by the way. So
Right.
I think that the nature of the football teams gives us a good idea of who the target was here. It was kind of youngish men, probably more likely to be impulsive about what they eat, more likely to be snacking, and also in the mindset of, oh, I burned a bunch of calories, therefore I can afford to have this snack. So again, with no particular insight into this brief, I think they were targeting young adults, skewing definitely male.
Yeah, I just to bring you up to speed, the setting for the Elton John version of this is a bunch of young Black men and a couple of women having a bit of a rap off, and they turn to the guy who is going to supposedly win and be the best singer, the best rhymer, rapper, and it's Elton John doing one of his classics, wearing a glittery jacket and wild glasses and clearly not fitting in. And all his buddies stop him and say, come on, man, what are you talking about? What are you doing here? And they give him the Snickers.
Mhm.
He becomes the one of the buddies.
I think,
It's the
I
same
think-
scenario.
yeah, I think probably what you're seeing there, just from the description, is an evolution from the first spot is kind of, I think, providing that very literal physical transformation, you know, in an athletic endeavor, to then they started to really grow that proposition of you're not yourself.
Mhm.
And they realized there's a lot of different you're not yourselves that you could take it to.
Right. Doesn't have to be a physical, doesn't have to be a sports thing. It could be lots of different things that we do everyday life. Yeah.
And I think probably part of that had to do with recognizing what worked as a formula in the first one, right? Celebrity, recognizable celebrity, fish out of water, recognizable celebrity. And then it's a point of replicating that formula, just like we see in Hollywood, right? Like, how do you top yourself? How do you, make it more inclusive, you know, to different audiences and, you know, capitalize on that successful formula.
I'm going to skip to the next question, no particular order, and ask, what do you think the single-minded proposition was? And I have a thought on this. So I'm going to jump in ahead of you. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that on those there are a number of rare occasions we've talked about in the past where the single-minded proposition ends up as public-facing language, sometimes as a tagline, sometimes as a headline, sometimes as the main idea. I think there's at least a possibility that the "you're not yourself when you're hungry" could have been a single-minded proposition for this brief.
Or an insight, right? So
Right.
I think that's I think it's a key insight. I think, you know, we have a lot of pop culture expressions about hunger. Like my stepdaughter is fond of using the expression hangry because she gets very hangry when, you know, when she's hungry. And so people get irritable. And I think that that's one facet of not being yourself when you're hungry. You know, some people get a headache, some people get irritable. In this particular example that we're showing is like not performing physically to the best of his ability or the expected ability. So I think that "you're not yourself when you're hungry" or some version of that, maybe not as well copywritten, was probably something, could be something like the insight. I think the promise or the single-minded proposition could be something like Snickers is a snack, not it's more than a treat, it's a snack, right?
Yeah.
And so
More
that
than
kind
just candy. Yeah.
yeah, it's more than just candy, it's food. And maybe that's not super sexy, but definitely it's a line that you could see could develop into this creative. Again, the objective here isn't to figure out exactly what the line was, but to think of a line that could have led credibly to this creative. And I think the idea of positioning the candy bar as food, or as more like a real food than a sweet treat or an indulgence, was something that had to have been or should have been would have been articulated in the brief.
Well, I like to quote my buddy Henry Gomez from time to time, and he has said in the past that, and this is a teachable moment, really, and talking about this, the objective or the goal for writing a single-minded proposition is to inspire. And you've said before many times, if I can't inspire, I want to be at the very minimum clear. So the couple of the lines that we've tossed out here as possible single-minded propositions, I think definitely fit the clear objective. Whether they are inspiring or not, we don't know because you don't have the brief.
And we're also trying to do it on the fly in 30 seconds, as opposed to sitting down and contemplating it and scratching out a bunch of stuff and you know, doing the due diligence of the headline exercise or whatever. So
yeah, exactly. But it's a great thought exercise. It's something that all of us in our industry can do every day in just a matter of seconds or a minute or two as we encounter a message. Just ask these questions over and over again.
One thing I wanted to add that we haven't talked about a lot in these creative brief kind of reverse engineering exercises is tone. And I think that that might have been a really important part of this brief. And the reason I say that is because Snickers is part of the Mars confectionery division. I work on a couple of brands in the Mars pet care division. And I don't know if this was the case back in 2010, but I assume that it was. It's true now in the pet care division. Each brand has a brand archetype, and it's really important to stay within that archetype and that tone, because they have a portfolio of brands, and sometimes those brands overlap in terms of need state and stuff. So the way they kind of define a bright line in terms of communication is by setting an archetype and a tone that's specific to that brand. And from what I could see here with it could be like a jester brand, right? So it's a brand that's trying to make you laugh, pointing out absurdity of everyday life. I think that tone probably here was something that was definitely clear on the brief of like, hey, this has to be a humorous spot. Where a candy bar, this is the way we speak. We poke fun at things.
So just kind of to wrap up here, when you do this, speaking now to our viewers, when you do this exercise, understand that you're not going to have the information, just as Henry and I don't have this information. We're kind of using our combined multiple decades of experience to make educated guesses, our understanding of the category, and working with briefs all the time. But this is a great opportunity for you to just practice your muscle, practice honing your muscle memory, and practicing that idea of how do I figure out what the key elements of this brief are. And it's something we can do every day.
And we're doing it here verbally, but I think the real way to do this is to take a template and actually try to filling it out, and look at the spot a few times, fill it out, look at the spot again, see if there's anything you change, challenge your thinking. And the point here is, yes, writing a brief, like telling you, oh, write a brief for such and such a brand is a good exercise, right? But that requires you having to research it and do it, and it's time consuming. This, I think, is a little less time consuming. It's not a substitute for writing a brief from scratch, but it can help you to start thinking about like, oh, how would I describe this target audience of young 20-somethings that are physically active, that are impulsive about the foods they eat or whatever, and create something. I talk a lot about a trick strategists use to nickname their target audience. Like, come up with a few nicknames. Like, what are we going to call, these are slacker weekend sports stars or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as you believe that it's credible to what you're seeing on the screen, and you practice that.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.